Today, we're going to talk about looking for country property. And first disclaimer is the counsel that the Spirit of Prophecy has about moving in the country. She says we should secure a place in the country. She doesn't say we should buy it. She says we should secure it. Because when I've had question and answer sessions after my old sessions, sometimes when people say, well, what about me? I can't afford to buy. Well, she didn't say you have to buy. She said secure it. You could rent it. You could house sit. God could give it to you. Tomorrow, you need to be here tomorrow because I have a videotaped testimony of a lady. She and her husband came from Russia. They had just their suitcases. They had no money. She was cleaning houses for a living in Seattle. And God did miracles, and they now own property in Montana that they didn't have to pay for. So you want to hear that testimony, and that lady will actually be here tomorrow. So how to find country property, what to look for, and we're going to have a video tour of a country property that was built by the gentleman who taught country living in PUC in his career, and they would come on their vacations, and they bought property, and they developed it. It was just timberland. They cleared it. They built a cabin. They developed a spring. And eventually, by the time they retired, they built a house. And we're going to tour that property in a video tour. And that property, they have both passed away, and that property is currently for sale. And the conference is the beneficiary. They had no children. And so it's in their trust that it all goes to the conference. So this property, you'll see it. It's available. If the Lord's impressing you to move to a turnkey, already done country property, it's got fruit trees and garden space and a greenhouse and all that stuff. What it doesn't have is alternative energy power, but that can be added pretty easy. But anyway, we'll have a video tour of that. So here we go. What to look for in country property. Now I have two families who are going to explain from their experience. Both of them have been doing country living for 10 years. I'm pretty sure the first one is Adventist. I know the second one's Adventist, but I'm pretty sure they're both Adventist couples. The first ones, they are in, I think it's Georgia. No, they're in Missouri, where the Ozark Mountains are. And the significant thing to me is, even though they're posting YouTube videos about the need to live in the country and what to look for and all that, they still don't own country property. Near as I can tell, they've been renting for 10 years in the country. And the second couple went to Southern Adventist University. He became a dentist. They moved to Hawaii and did country living, and they're going to give their points of view of the things to look for in country property.
Thinking about moving to the country?
Maybe you don't know where to look or what to look for.
We decided 10 years ago that we were going to move out of the cities. And in this video, we're going to share with you 7 key elements to look for to help you in your search for your country property.
Going to want to look for is an independent water source. This can come in a variety of ways. A spring, a well, a creek, a pond, maybe even a lake.
The second thing we look for in a country property is if it has a stand of trees. This is important to us because a nice stand of trees can provide a number of different things. 1, a heat source. 2, privacy. And 3, even a possible means of income.
Third on our list is a place to grow your food. You're going to want to have a great garden spot and orchard.
This is a must-have. Just think, if you can grow your own food, the quality is going to be better. The taste, unbelievable. And you don't have to depend on the store for your food.
No.
Number 4 on the list is privacy. You might think, oh, you're out in the country. Privacy is a given, but that's not always the case. Here's an example. We've lived on 3 acres where a house was set back from the road. We were surrounded by a buffer of hundreds of acres of cow pasture and trees versus a 100-acre property that we lived on, and the house was 50 feet from the road. Not so private.
I'm really excited about point 5, and that is a strategic location. We have this book, it's one of our favorite books written by Joel Skousen. It's called Strategic Relocation. And it's very important that you do find a strategic location when you are considering where you're going to be finding a country home. And he covers everything you can imagine in this book. Some of the considerations that you might have for a particular state are: what are the homeschooling laws like? Does that state respect constitutional rights? What are the natural disasters in that area? What's the climate in that area? How high is the crime? What's the population density? There are so many factors in this book that are considered. I highly recommend the book, but it is important that you do choose a strategic location.
Number 6 is the potential that the property has for alternative energy. If you're not familiar with what those are, most commonly wind energy, solar, and microhydro. So depending on the layout of the land, one could be better for you than another. So this is something that you're going to want to look into when you're observing a property.
The 7th thing that you're going to want to consider in finding your country property is the accessibility. Now, when you are considering accessibility, there's actually going to be different preferences for different people. Some people are going to want it to be as accessible as possible. Some people are going to want it to be very difficult to get into.
So some things that come to mind: springtime or the rainy season in most locations, mud can be horrible and make it very hard to get in and out of your property. Wintertime, if you live in an area north, snow might be an issue. Also, depending on where you live, flooding could be an issue in the winter or spring months.
Another thing that you want to consider when talking about accessibility is: what access do people have to your property, and are you having to access through somebody else's property to get to your property?
In this discussion, we're going to be drawing from our own experience living off-grid in Hawaii for the past 10 years.
So one of the first things we considered is population density.
Population density is a measure of how many people live in a particular area. So it's measured in people per square mile. Typically, some parts of every state are very populated and other parts are not. So in the state of Hawaii, for example, in Oahu, the island of Oahu, there are over 1,600 people per square mile, and that is the population density. On this island, the island of Hawaii, the Big Island, this island has a population density that's currently 45 people per square mile. So another thing to consider is distance from the city. Here on this island, we're fortunate not to have any major cities. The nearest one would be several islands away, approximately 210 miles. However, on this island, we do have some small cities in the neighborhood of approximately 45,000 people. And so in the past, living on this island, we have lived as far as an hour away from the city, or the small city. However, more recently, we were looking at a minimum of 10 miles outside of this town or city. And we ended up settling on a place approximately half an hour away. So we wanted enough distance for city expansion over time, as well as for us to be able to commute to work, get needed groceries and supplies during the development phase, etc.
Yes.
I would say when considering a country property, that probably the home itself is probably one of the last things that one should consider. In other words, if you find a property and it looks like the property is actually not great, but the home is great, I would consider look elsewhere, because country living is a lot more than just country location. It is about independence, it's about reliance upon oneself and God, and there's a lot that goes into that. There's agriculture, there's generation of your own power, there's access to water, so there are many considerations. The first thing that we really looked at was property suitability for agriculture.
Yes.
So thinking ahead, we know that that is perhaps paramount, right?
Privacy.
Yeah, so from the counsels that we've been given, as well as our own experience, as well as common sense, if you look around at the world today, privacy is very important, and it's becoming more and more important all the time. And so ideally you want to get a piece of property that will give you enough space, and if it doesn't have built-in privacy, You can always try to figure out some privacy that you can put in place.
Decent road access.
The access to your property, whether that be county roads or whether that be private roads, whatever it is, you've got to make sure that it's going to be suitable for your needs. And everybody's needs may be a little different if people have access to different kinds of vehicles, etc. But you've just got to really consider. So the next thing we looked at was sunshine. And sunshine is really important for a lot of reasons. You want to purchase a place where cloud cover is not dominant, where you have access to sunshine for as much of the year as possible. And you need that for a couple of reasons. Number one, for independent power generation, which would mean solar power panels. And also
Food production.
Also for food production. So you're going to have some agriculture, you're going to have trees, you're going to be growing gardens, and those are really going to rely upon the sun for food production. And so your food production and your power production could be significantly less if you happen to not have enough sun in your location.
Yes, and another important point is you want to consider your mental health, because without sunshine, most people feel very gloomy and it's not a good environment to live in. So for us, it was very important, especially I'm a stay-at-home mom and I stay at home most of the time with my kids. I wanted to be able to be most of the time in the sunshine and be happy most of the time, right?
Here in Hawaii, as you move away from the ocean up the slopes of the mountains, typically the higher up you go, the less sunshine you have, the more cloud cover you have. And so for us, that meant the need to stay closer toward the ocean for the sunshine, for the lower elevation, which enables us to grow more crops, etc.
Yeah, it's really a fine balance to try to be not too close to the ocean, not too close to the highway, yet to be not too far away that you're just living in the clouds.
The next point is rainfall. Rainfall is key. It's absolutely key. You're relying upon this to pretty much grow whatever it is you need to grow, in addition to beautify and keep nature all green around you.
Let's see, the next thing is breezes, trade winds, and airflow.
So airflow is really important, and one of the ways that you can accomplish that, of course, is to make sure that the area around your home site is cleared enough that the breezes can come in, right? And in the absence of these winds or breezes, you're going to have mold problems, especially in high humidity areas like Hawaii.
Now let's talk about homeowner associations.
So our opinion on homeowners associations is to avoid them, really. So what they are is these are local groups, community groups, neighborhood associations that essentially want to be involved in all of your decisions that you make related to your property.
Let's see, phone and internet access. Those are important things.
Yeah, so you probably want to consider when you're looking at your property, what kind of access do you have to phone and internet? You might have a cell signal, and that might be a blessing, as long as, of course, the cell tower is not right next door to you. But do you have access to what you need as far as phone and internet, whether that be landline or otherwise? Ideally, you want to live in an area where you're not the only person who's independent for the necessities of life. In other words, you don't want to be the only person who has large gardens and orchards. So if you can see that your neighbors are also have built some resiliency into their lives, they have some agriculture going on, etc., that's a real plus.
Because when the crisis comes, and you're the only one who has food, guess where everybody's gonna go?
Yeah, and so we're always happy to share, but you don't want your own supplies to be wiped out by thieves.
Right, I mean, it's all about safety too.
We're also going to avoid land needing expensive improvements. At least you're going to want to really know about that and do your due diligence as to what it's going to cost before you sign on the dotted line.
Landlocked. What
Yes.
does that mean?
So you want to just make sure that you have legal access to the property. And so if your property is not bordering a county road or something like that, do you actually have legal access to get there?
Another thing is to avoid natural hazard zones.
Right, so the most common application of this would be flood zones. You're going to want to look at the FEMA flood site and look at their maps and see, is the area you're considering purchasing, is it at risk of flooding? So country living is really about many things, but one aspect of it is providing for the necessities of life, providing for our family. And so thinking ahead to a time when there will be no buying or selling for those who are faithful to God and keep his commandments.
Yes.
And so it's important that we realize what are some of the basic necessities of life. This is about water, food, shelter and warmth, and also personal safety. And so we want to make sure that when we're selecting a country property, that we can take care of these necessities of life on that property, and that we have a plan on how to do that.
An interesting thing about these folks is they weren't renting, they were buying. And they were developing the property. They'd buy property and develop the land and everything. They have a whole series of their journey for 10 years on YouTube. You can subscribe to their channel and watch all their stuff. And the thing is that they developed this property earlier, and then a volcano blew and the lava covered the road and completely isolated everybody on the other side permanently. They had no power, they had no access, nothing. So I assume they had to just walk away and start over again. So he talked about flooding as a natural disaster, but I think they experienced one even worse. These are videos that we've made that are related to what we're talking about today. When you look at a particular video on this list on the website, excuse me, it'll say video or podcast. The podcast is an audio recording of the same thing. So let's say you commute to work and you want to listen while you're driving. You can download that podcast onto your phone and then listen to it while you go to work. You wouldn't have the graphics, but you can listen to it. So here's the topics. Thank you. What to look for in country property, how to find good country property, the pros and cons of developing bare country property, country living on a budget, building a tiny house. So this is talking about building the tiny house. Money-saving tips, water sources, surface water, wells, springs, rainwater catchment, and water purification. Preparing for wildfires, the way God protected us when we had a wildfire on our property 5 weeks ago. It burned 50 acres. It burnt part of our place, part of our son-in-law and daughter's place, part of the county's property. And it was a very scary moment. And everybody's safe and our houses are all safe. There were two helicopters and 18 fire trucks fighting the fire on a Sabbath afternoon. So anyway, it's pretty cool to see the miracles that God did to save everybody. It was really neat. Preparing for wildfires, country living mistakes, tiny house tour, finding country property, our future country property in heaven. 20 steps to moving in the country, sustainable country living book. That's this book. And the Amy Country Homestead Tour, which is what we are going to do momentarily. When I was writing this book last fall, I sent the manuscript to a friend of mine who wrote the first review on the back of the book. And he had a suggestion, why don't you make a wish list of everything that you would consider when you're looking for country property and then prioritize them. Is this important? Is it not important? Is this a negative? And so in the back of the book, these addendum of all these different things to consider when you're looking for country property. Okay, now we're going to do a video tour. Again, this family, Lloyd and Mary Margaret Amy, taught at PUC for their career. He taught biology, and he actually went to the biology department meeting one time, and he said, you know, everybody's required to take a beginning biology course, but the biology course is written for people who are biology majors. We ought to have a course for general people to take that's a required course, like country living. And of course they said, okay, do it. So he taught a course in country living, and he scoured all over the place trying to find a textbook, and he couldn't find one. So he wrote the textbook, and it got published by Southern Publishing Association. And so that's on that list I gave you yesterday, I think. Well, this is their home. They retired, and what they did is they prayed about it. Where should we go? And they found this property. It was timber, and they bought it. And then every summer they would come up during their vacation, and they would develop the land a little more. They cleared it. They built a cabin. They developed a spring. They eventually designed a house. And by the time they retired, the house was almost done. And the moving van moved their stuff from PUC and put it in the garage while they finished the house. And they lived in the cabin for a while. So this is a video tour of it. And this property, I always had in mind. I became friends with them. And the reason I did is because I was teaching a country living seminar, one of the ones you guys went to. And we got acquainted with them. And I thought, you know, I wonder if they're going to be at camp meeting. Here I'm going to be telling people about his book. And he's sitting right in front of me. I don't even know what he looks like. So I called him up and I introduced myself, and are you going to be at camp meeting? And he says, no, we're elderly and we don't do camp meeting anymore. And I said, okay. And I told him what we were doing. And so that began a friendship that lasted the rest of their life. And our kids called him Grandpa and Grandma, you know. So anyway, they didn't have any kids. And so they arranged with the Trust Services of Washington Conference that their estate would go to the conference. So right now they both passed away, and the conference literally owns the property. And my goal, long before they passed away, is I would tell them, I said, look, you guys have literally wrote the book on country living. You developed your house based on those principles. The last thing I want to see is when the time comes to sell that property, somebody from California comes in, they cut down the cedar trees and put in a riding arena. You've got everything turnkey for country living right here, but done by an Adventist who wrote the book. So when the time came, I made this video and I sent it to everybody I knew. And I was sure I was going to be able to find someone to buy this place. And it came and went, and it didn't happen. And so the realtor, who's an Adventist, listed it, in my opinion, the opportunity of a lifetime, to just walk into a country living property that's already made. The only thing it's missing is solar. It's got everything else, wood heat and a place to get the wood and everything. So we're going to have a little tour here. I shortened the video tour because I don't want the seminar to go too long. So we're just going to see the outside. But if you go to my website, the link's on the sheet. You can watch the whole thing and go through the house and see everything that's there.
Lloyd and Mary Margaret were instructors at Pacific Union College during their career, and this was their retirement home, which they developed from bare land. We are at the end of a 2-mile-long county road. At the time they moved here and bought the property, it wasn't paved, but you can see the end of the paved road in this view. We will now proceed to their driveway. This is the entry to the property off the county road. You will see it's a nice wooded 10 acres with ferns on either side of the driveway, making it very nice. The adjoining wooded area on either side is a tall stand of cedar trees. It's very beautiful. This is the home. It's a 2,000 square foot, 2-story home. Real quality built home, built in 1989. The 2.5 car garage is a 1,300 square foot. Plus there's a little wood shop in the back, a 3/4 bathroom, and a wood shed inside and outside in the garage area. We will proceed to tour the outside of the property and then go inside. It's nicely landscaped. All of what you see here are rhododendrons and azaleas, which are beautiful colored plants. during the year. They're evergreen the rest of the year. You can see in the distance there's a beautiful, apparently a cherry tree that's in bloom. There's a fenced orchard with about a dozen fruit trees. The framed area is blueberries. There are, as I recall, also seedless blackberries, and we will show you grapes in a minute. But here's the rest of the front area of the property. When Lloyd and Mary Margaret first bought this property, they had to whack their way in through the thick woods to get here. And then over the years, as they'd come up in the summers from working at PUC, they would clear this land and live in a tent. And then they would go on hiking expeditions and such, backpacking. Over the years, they built this cabin. The lumber was built from trees knocked down here on the property, and Lloyd cut up the lumber with a Alaska chainsaw sawmill. They lived in this two-room cabin when they would come up for the summers. It had a wood stove in the main room and a kitchen, and then they had a bedroom with a bathroom. And the bathroom even had a, because it was off-grid and no running water, they would haul water from a spring quite a distance away in a pail. And then they had a shower with a 5-gallon bucket with a rope and a pulley with holes in the bottom. They'd fill the warm water in the bucket and then lift the bucket and have a shower. The property has a nice orchard of about a dozen fruit trees of varieties and some grapes, and I understand seedless blackberries as well. These appear to be grapes. I recall they were Concord grapes, I believe, on this fence. In one corner of the orchard is a blueberry patch with about a half a dozen blueberry bushes matured. They're very productive. There's a frame around it with which allows for netting when the berries are ripe to keep the birds from taking them. Sauk Mountain is in the distance. And here's the rhododendrons and azaleas on the... This is a video tour of some country property owned by Lloyd and Mary Margaret Amy, who she is in a facility, retired, and he's passed away. The Lloyd and Mary Margaret were instructors at Pacific Union College during their career, and this was their retirement home, which they developed from bare land. We are at the end of a 2-mile-long county road. At the time they moved here and bought the property, it wasn't paved, but you can see the end of the paved road in this view. We will now proceed to their drive. This is the entry to the property off the county road. You will see it's a nice wooded 10 acres with ferns on either side of the driveway, making it very nice. The adjoining wooded area on either side is a tall stand of cedar trees. It's very beautiful. This is the home. It's a 2,000 square foot, 2-story home. Real quality built home, built in 1989. The 2.5 car garage is a 1,300 square foot. Plus there's a little wood shop in the back, a 3/4 bathroom, and a wood shed inside and outside in the garage area. We will proceed to tour the outside of the property and then go inside. It's nicely landscaped. All of what you see here are rhododendrons and azaleas, which are beautiful colored plants during the year. They're evergreen. The rest of the year, you can see in the distance, there's a beautiful, apparently a cherry tree that's in bloom. There's a fenced orchard with about a dozen fruit trees. The framed area is blueberries. There are, as I recall, also seedless blackberries, and we will show you grapes in a minute. But here's the rest of the front area of the property. When Lloyd and Mary Margaret first bought this property, they had to whack their way in through the thick woods to get here. And then over the years, as they'd come up in the summers from working at PUC, they would clear this land and live in a tent. And then they would go on hiking expeditions and such, backpacking. Over the years, they built this cabin. The lumber was built from trees knocked down here on the property, and Lloyd cut up the lumber with a Alaska chainsaw sawmill. They lived in this 2-room cabin when they would come up for the summers. It had a wood stove in the main room and a kitchen, and then they had a bedroom with a bathroom. And the bathroom even had because it was off-grid and no running water, they would haul water from a spring quite a distance away, but in a pail. And then they had a shower with a 5-gallon bucket with a rope and a pulley with holes in the bottom. They'd fill the warm water in the bucket and then lift the bucket and have a shower. The property has a nice orchard of about a dozen fruit trees of varieties and some grapes, and I understand seedless blackberries as well. These appear to be grapes. I recall they were Concord grapes, I believe, on this fence. In one corner of the orchard is a blueberry patch with about a half a dozen blueberry bushes matured. They're very productive. There's a frame around it with which allows for netting when the berries are ripe to keep the birds from taking them. Sauk Mountain is in the distance. And here's the rhododendrons and azaleas on the front back side of the house. And this is the south side of the house. You can see it's a 2-story house. Living room space is on the lower right, master bedroom on the lower left, and then great room space upstairs. There's an attached sunroom on either side of that door, in which Lloyd was starting seeds and raising orchids. And then the window on the left is a little wood shop in the back of the garage. You can see there's skylights above that sunroom. This little fenced area is what was their garden in their elderly years, but I understood from Lloyd that there had been a much larger garden over here in previous years. Lloyd Amy literally wrote the book on country living, and when they purchased this property, they were attempting to implement all of the principles that he had written about and taught about country living on this property. While Lloyd attempted to integrate as many sustainable elements to this property as he could, it isn't off-grid. You can see the power transformer for the underground power. That's the only aspect, in my opinion, on this property that could be enhanced, that's missing regarding being sustainably independent, is the aspect of having alternative energy, which could be added. But it already has a dozen fruit trees, it has blueberries, grapes, other kinds of berries. It's got a source of firewood in the woods on the property. It has a wood stove for heat. So from a sustainable country living perspective, in my opinion, this is an ideal place. If you took bare land and were going to develop your own country property, how long would it take to grow fruit trees to be productive? How long would it take to have garden space that would be productive and build a greenhouse and so forth? And this has everything except for the addition of some alternative energy which could be added.
So what I'm going to show you now is ways to find country property. What we did is we made a wish list, and there were my wife and I and our daughter and her husband, and we made a wish list. We each made a wish list, and then we prioritized them with the most important at the top, and then we merged the lists together for all of these stakeholders so that we knew what were the most important things at the top. And then, based on that information, we started looking. And we looked at Northern California, Oregon, Washington, Idaho, Montana, and British Columbia, because we're all dual citizens. And we landed in Western Washington. So there are some things we didn't want. We didn't want a railroad track with a train going by in the middle of the night. We didn't want high-tension power lines on our property, et cetera, et cetera. And so we took these priority things. And by the way, we picked Western Washington so we wouldn't have a wildfire, and then we had a wildfire. Yeah, I figured, hey, if you're in Western Washington, there's enough population and everything's green and wet, and it's not going to happen. And then it happened. So anyway, this is happens to be Windermere Realty, but most realty companies have some form of this, and so you find the geographic area in the map, and it will show you the listings, the multiple listings for that geographic area. So it wouldn't have to be Windermere listings, it would be anything in the MLS. So all of these dots are houses or properties for sale. The red one is the one we're clicking on, and that happens to be what's showing up on the left. So this Amy property we just saw is listed right now, and it's the red dot, which brought that up. And then when you click on that one, it gives you everything about that property. So it shows you pictures, a gallery. By the way, you can see the inside there with the living room with the fire, the stove. Really nice big windows. You can see all the, and the Kathy West is an Adventist realtor that's handling it. But it shows how many bedrooms, how many baths, how many square feet, all that kind of stuff. And then you can click further down. It'll give you a detailed description. It'll tell you what the taxes are, the lot size, etc. And then more information, how the place is heated and so forth. And so from the realty website on a property that you're considering, you can find out all that information that they've provided. Now let me explain my strategy is that I start with the realtors, and then when I've exhausted everything that fits what I'm looking for, then I don't limit myself to the realty listings, because there may be a property for sale like this was before it got put on the MLS. When I was trying to tell Adventist people about it, it wasn't listed yet. So if somebody made an offer and it was accepted, it would have never got on the MLS because it would have got sold. So, we had a person in the last class who said, I want to move. I've got all these fruit trees and stuff that I've done, but I want to move and be near my family. Well, how would you know? It's not listed. So what I did is we would, based on our wish list, we would be driving around the geographic area that we think fits, and we just drive and look around, and we go, oh, that's a nice looking place. So if you have on your phone the ability to go to the county website, you can look up that piece of property on the county website based on the address. And so, for instance, let's see, right here. So you can do the address or the parcel number or the owner's last name or the name of the road, and you can find out information and try to zero in on that piece of property. You haven't knocked on the door, it's not got a for sale sign, but you're wanting to know if it fits the criteria what you're looking for. So I typed in Amy's name, and it tells you Amy, Lloyd, and Mary Margaret, Rev Trust. That's Washington Conference Trust, okay? You can be on the county site. We've done the realty site. You're on the county site, and the county has lots of really detailed information. A legal description, that's this big stuff at the bottom. And here's another thing. So you're driving around, you look at this place and say, I'm interested. Do you go and knock on the door and say, do you want to sell? No. And the reason is you don't know who lives in there. If you look at this, it will tell you the address of the house, but it'll also tell you the address of who owns it. And if it's different, then the owner doesn't live there. So you don't knock on the door and say, do you want to sell it? Because the renter's going to say no, right? So you can figure this stuff out without even leaving your car. And so you can find out all kinds of information, how much they paid for it, when they bought it, what the taxes are, et cetera, okay? Then, and there's a map. You can click on iMap and it'll take you to a map. But then here, you know, how long ago they bought it. And this is an important key thing. The upper right corner, taxable value 2024, 677,000. Now, if you notice, the asking price was 740. The taxable market value is 677. This young lady here is a realtor, and tell me if it's right now. It used to be that if you went and you looked at the taxable value, it would be less than the asking price. And why do you think it would be? Any idea? It's because the assessor is an elected official, and they want to get elected. And if everybody's mad at the assessor because that guy came around and said your property's worth more money than you think it's worth, and you're paying more taxes, then they're going to get that person out of there and get somebody else. So in general, at least in the past, the assessed value would help you figure out what it's worth, but it's going to be worth more than that by maybe 20%. Is that true in today's market? Is it? Okay. Because I talked to somebody and the market's so crazy that it actually wasn't true in that one instance, but depends where it's at, depends on the market. Yep. So there's a lot of really good information in here. A thing to check out is the, like that one guy said, check the FEMA floodplain map. There's a thing called a 100-year flood, and there's a thing called a 500-year flood. And you want to make sure that you're in a safe place, you know. Okay, so another thing is to do Google Maps. That's the one I use when I'm trying to drive and figure out what the traffic is. Google Maps will show you, you can put in the address or zero in visually, and you can find the property and see what the area is like. How close is it to town, etc. Google Earth is an expanded version of Google Maps, and it will allow you to do more things. Google Maps, I think, will do this, and that is a what do you call it? Topographical, yes, thank you, topographical map. So these dark areas are steep banks, and the others are flat. You can tell by this visual whether this property's on a hill, whether it's flat, whether there's a cliff. You know, I've got a friend that owns some property with a view, and it is like straight down on that one side. And if you just drove by and looked, you wouldn't know necessarily. Now, another thing, you can do the satellite image. So this allows you to see where there's trees, what the neighbors' properties and buildings look like, whether there's a gravel pit or a commercial something next door, pig farm or whatever. And so that's Google Earth. So there's some neat tools that you can use that are free. The real estate listing, the county information, and Google Earth and Google Maps. To be aware of new videos like this one, be sure to subscribe to the Preparing for the Time of Trouble channel. For more free videos and downloadable audio podcasts, as well as handouts, go to www.preparingforthetimeoftrouble.com. Topic categories include recordings of live seminar presentations, country living, sustainable gardening, homestead remedies, how to be self-sufficient when the grid goes down, wild edible and medicinal plants, hydrotherapy, and end-time Bible prophecies. To take advantage of these free resources, go to preparingforthetimeoftrouble.com.